Good day, everybody. This is Chris back again with the Ancient Scholar, and now we're going to go ahead and talk about the barbiturates. So first, let's go ahead and jump into some of the historical context real quick. So the historical context goes back to the mid 1860s, 1864, where a chemist was playing around. I believe Adolf von Baer. And what he did was he took two different organic molecules. A molecule at that time um, was a common chemical that came from apples, and that is malonic acid. So here I have malonic acid. Let me pull back here a little bit so you can see the structure here. Here you go with your little hydrogens that can pop off as protons. All right, and you have a carbon chain here. All right, double bond, and you have two hydrogens here. All right, fair enough. There you go. You have malonic acid from apples. And then we also had urea, which came from animals, right? Came from animals, urea. And that's this little guy here. So I have a double covalent bond to an oxygen here. I have two nitrogens here, and then I have two hydrogens on each of the nitrogens. So what happened was it was a combination of urea. Let me pull this back here. Is a combination of urea and malonic acid. And so what happened was it mixed them together. These two molecules made mad sweet love. And what happened? Well, this is what happened here. He was able to create a molecule of malonyl urea, okay, or barbituric acid, all right, which is just a combination of malonic acid and urea, okay. So you can see right here where I have the contribution of urea, and over on this side I have the contribution of malonic acid, all right. And let me go ahead and just pull that way there so you can actually see the hydrogens attached to the nitrogens there, okay, and then I'll kind of hold it from over here. Okay, so before I talk any further, what I want to do is, maybe I'll hold it from there, okay, what I want to do is just kind of orient you to how we look at the carbons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right here at this carbon next to these nitrogens here. So there we go. Let's do that. Let me just hold the molecule like that. Okay, so what we're going to do to number our carbons is I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to go clockwise. It may appear counterclockwise on the video because the video is kind of mirrors, so it gets flipped. I haven't really oriented myself that well, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here, and I'm going to go around this way, numbering my carbons, okay, or numbering the atoms that make up the central ring here, because obviously this is not a carbon, this is nitrogen. So this is my number 1. This is number 2 right here that I'm holding on to. This is number 3. This is number 4. This is number 5, and this up here is number 6. Okay. So what do we have? We have a carbon a carbon double bond to an oxygen at 2. A carbon at 4, and a carbon at 6. Okay, so that's just something to know there. All right, so here we go. Here I have my molecule of barbituric acid, or malonyurea. And guess what? This doesn't do a whole lot of anything. Okay, sorry, it just doesn't. It's just the historical context. So what happened was, from here we did some experiments, and then in the early 1900s, this is just prior to Einstein in special relativity in 1905, I believe this is 1903, 1904, what chemists were able to do was they were able to substitute these hydrogens here for ethyl groups. So let's just do that. An ethyl group is just an alkane. All right, just 2 carbons, single covalently bound with oxygens hanging off of all the other areas where you don't have carbons bonded to carbons. So what do? We'll pop those hydrogens off there. Boom, boom. I'm going to go ahead and stick an ethyl group here. and then another ethyl group here, boom, boom. All right, there I have my ethyl groups that I've substituted. Boom, boom, boom. All right, and what do we have here? We now have a molecule of barbitol. All right, this is a molecule of barbitol, and this is the first commercially used barbiturate. Okay, we called this barbitol, and all it was barbituric acid. Okay, barbituric acid, where I had substituted the hydrogens on the carbon 5 right here, carbon number 5, or the number 5 position on this ring here, and I substitute those oxygens with these two ethyl groups. All right. Once I do that, I now have a pharmacologically active molecule. I have my first commercially used barbiturate, barbitol. Barbitol, like all barbiturates, is able to interact with the GABA A receptor, particularly. That's what we are talking about here. At low doses, all of your barbiturates do not directly activate the receptor, but rather what they do is they bind to an allosteric area of the receptor, a non-active area of the receptor, and they potentiate the action of GABA. So what happens is, if you give the barbiturates at your lower to modest doses, they don't actually cause the GABA receptor to open, but what they do is they make the GABA receptor respond much better to the GABA that you already have circulating. However, at very high doses, the barbiturates actually cause the GABA receptor to open up, just like GABA. So at low doses, they potentiate the action of GABA. At high doses, they actually mimic the action of GABA. Now, barbitol was interesting in that if you look at this, this isn't particularly lipid soluble. Yes, I do have, certainly these are going to help with lipid solubility. Anytime you have long carbon hydrogen, lots of carbon hydrogen groups, you're going to have a more non-polar molecule. But I've got these nitrogens here, and if I had to guess, I would guess that these nitrogens here prevent this because there's some that makes this molecule more polar because these are electronegative, and maybe to a slight extent oxygen. But this is not highly lipid soluble. Okay, so if I administer this, what's going to happen, this barbitol, well, it's going to take a while to get into the neurons, right? Because you have to penetrate membranes, and membranes have lots of lipids in them. So you have to penetrate the central nervous system. That's going to take a long time. And then what they found out was that the duration of action was incredibly long. You're looking at up to 36 hours for duration of action if you give this barbitol to somebody. So it takes a while to actually start working. And then once it starts working, you have a really drowsy patient, and they're very drowsy for a very long period of time. So what happened was, a few years later in 1912, chemists said, hey, could we make something that was maybe a bit more lipophilic and had a shorter duration of action, right? So you didn't have these adverse side effects that lasted as long. So what they did was they actually replaced one of these ethyl groups here on this 5 position here. So that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these ethyl groups off, okay, and I'm going to replace that with this guy here. This is an aromatic ring or a benzene ring. And so what they did was they replaced that with a benzene ring. All right, so I just replaced one of the ethyl groups with the benzene ring on the 5 position, okay, and now I have a benzene ring here, and this is now a molecule of phenobarbitol. I have added a ring here. I've added an aromatic ring, and now I have gone from barbitol to phenobarbital by adding on that aromatic ring. The trade name, a common trade name in the United States at least, is luminol for phenobarbital. Now, phenobarbital was perhaps a bit better than barbitol in that its duration of action was a little shorter. You're only looking at about 10 to 12 hours, still a really long plasma half-life, up to 100 hours or so for that plasma half-life. That's not the duration of action, but that's just the plasma half-life. This could be given intravenously. It still had a relatively slow duration of action. And it had pretty decent anticonvulsant effects, and a fairly low abuse potential because, you know, you take it, you're going to be drowsy for 12 hours, and, you know, nobody wants to be, you know, a lot of people don't want to deal with being drowsy for that long period of time. And then phenobarbital also had some anti-anxiety or anxiolytic properties, and back in the day, we used to use phenobarbital in some cases. I think they still do occasionally to induce what's called a barbiturate coma, where somebody maybe had a bad head injury and you wanted to decrease the work that the brain was doing and decrease all the brain function. You would give them large doses of IV phenobarbital to put them in a chemical coma. There are other substances that we have available that don't have the duration of action issues that phenobarbital does. So what happened was we, primarily by just the substitutions on this five carbon here in this ring, this carbon here, by substituting here, I put a benzene ring on and make phenobarbital, but I could put other, I could substitute this with other molecules, and I'll do that in another video, and make other molecules. What we're able to do is we're able to make several different classes of barbiturates. The phenobarbital falls into what's known as the long-acting. These last a long time, and they have fairly low lipid solubility. You also have what are called intermediate acting, which can last up to about 6 hours, have pretty much the same indications as the long-acting ones. Then you have your short-acting benzodiazepines, and then finally your ultra-short-acting, and I'll actually show you what that looks like, probably in another video because this one's getting kind of long. So you basically have 4 different classes. You have your long-acting, like phenobarbital, your intermediate, your short, and your ultra-short. And I'm going to show you an ultra-short one called thiopental, or sodium thiopental. It's not as commonly used in the United States anymore, but actually I ran into it when I was working in Afghanistan. They had quite a bit of it. They had that and ketamine, and it's a very, very rapid-acting agent. And it's highly lipid soluble, unlike the long-acting agent. So it penetrates the brain really quick, has a really quick onset, and its effect don't last very long. It has a very short duration of action, somewhere around half an hour or less than that, which makes it a good agent for if you need a quick onset of sedation, stopping the seizure, getting somebody induced to a point where you can start surgery on them, do procedures and whatnot. So that made thiopental, or sodium thiopental, kind of a nice agent. Unfortunately, the short-acting agents can impact your hemodynamics quite significantly, particularly your blood pressure. The benzodiazepines, not only do they have the central nervous system effects with the GABA A receptors, but they have peripheral nervous system effects as well, and they can actually cause direct myocardial and skeletal muscle inhibition and depression. So hemodynamic changes and cardiac output can be compromised by giving these barbiturates, particularly large doses of your short-acting ones. Okay, guys, I'm going to cut this video off. The next video, I'll show you what sodium thiopental or thiopental looks like. And then we'll work our way into the benzodiazepines. As always, thanks for hanging in there.